I believe that 95% of what we're going through now has been caused by the federal government's interference in our lives. And that interference comes only because we've ignored the very document upon which this country was founded. Now, having said that, we can debate our founding documents, we can debate a number of different issues, but the truth is there is one straightforward, real question for San Francisco Republicans in this debate. And that is the question, which one of the two candidates here is best equipped to take on the critically important role of facing the most powerful Democrat in the U.S. Congress? My opponent's record is transparent. As she mentioned, she ran in 2008, but first and foremost, we have to understand that my opponent doesn't live in the district. In 2008, when she ran, she raised more money than Nancy Pelosi's 10 previous Republican opponents combined, and yet she got the fewest votes that any Republican has ever received running against Nancy Pelosi. This is an enormous handicap for my opponent to overcome. In contrast, I offer not only a new face to the electorate, but also a new approach for the Republicans, which has energized a new volunteer base and generated contributions and support from around the nation. But make no mistake, the campaign against Nancy Pelosi is a national campaign. It's essential that we select the best Republican for the task.
The next question is from the audience. Do you think the U.S. should be encouraging democracy abroad, and if so, to what extent? To Dana.
That's mine. Actually, I do. Again, I ran against Nancy Pelosi and Cindy Sheehan in the last election, and I remember there was a picture that was very important to me as I ran that race. And it was a picture, and I'm sure you probably all remember, it was an iconic picture of a woman with her burqa off her face with a big smile, and she was holding up her purple finger. I think there have been many cases in our history that we have had to respond with force. And democracies have been built from that. Certainly Japan and Germany were occupied by us, and the Marshall Plan, much like we're doing in Afghanistan, building up a country so that it can stand on its own. I campaigned last time, and I saw the Cindy Sheehan people, and I know that you have anti-war supporters, and I was very clear when I saw those people that they are the Hate America crowd.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Arthur. Yes, I do think we can encourage democracy abroad, just not through force. We can do it by example, but this making the world safe for democracy and building democracy is, I don't think it should be the American foreign policy, and frankly, it is not the U.S., it should not be the Republican foreign policy. I mean, this making the world safe for democracy is straight out of Woodrow Wilson era progressivism. It is not what this country was founded on. And our party has a long tradition of not participating in that sort of foreign policy. Our history of non-interventionism in this party is long and deep. It is what we should follow. And at the end of the day, we should also listen to Ronald Reagan's comment to us, which was to be that shining city on the hill. And if we do that, we'll encourage a lot more democracies through peace than we will through force.
Would you support renewal of free trade agreements like NAFTA, even if it was clear that significant jobs would be lost? John?
Yeah, I'm not so sure that that not renewing NAFTA would result in job losses. You know, I'm not an expert on it, but from what I've read, NAFTA is far more a managed trade agreement than it is a free trade agreement. I have a deep commitment and a big believer in free trade. Free trade creates wealth. Isolationism does not. If isolationism worked, North Korea would be the wealthiest country in the world. But free trade works. Unfortunately, the NAFTA trade agreement limits things. It allows certain people to get special deals, and I think that it can be reworked, and I think we can have a much better framework for trade around the world.
What should be the U.S. policy towards Israel, the proposed Palestinian state, and more immediately, new settlements in the West Bank? Dana?
My understanding is that basically the Israeli government has given up far more than the Palestinians have, and we're at a point now where the United States government is pretty much siding with the Palestinians and not so much with Israel.
Yeah, I think Israel, of course, is an important ally, and it's an important democracy in the Middle East. And as I mentioned before, I think that we do far more to hurt Israel in its position by putting the handcuffs on it. We're constantly telling it what to do. And I have to admit, I'm not a big fan of foreign aid, but in this context, I think if we're going to give foreign aid to Israel, we should give it with no strings attached. We give aid here in this country to lots of folks, and we don't tell them how to live their lives. If we give them trade, I think this sort of paternalistic relationship where we come in and tell them where they can build settlements is not going to ultimately work. If Israel decides that they want to build settlements, that is their business. They have to live with the ramifications. I think they know where they're going with that, and it's up to them to make that decision.
While the Iraq war is winding down, what is your view of the Afghanistan war, keeping in mind that Afghanistan provides 80% of the world's opium supply? John?
Well, I've been on the record since I decided to run that I think we should end our involvement in Afghanistan. It's a war that's gone on for a long time now. It's now currently the longest war that we've had in U.S. history. We had every right. We might not have done it the way I would have preferred at the beginning, but we had every right to go in after Osama bin Laden. And we unfortunately have been there, I think, far too long. Since I made my announcement that I was running and came and announced that position, I'm happy to say that a number of conservative columnists and politicians have also come out and joined me. George Will, Tony Blankley, media conservative person Joe Scarborough, Michael Savage, of all people, Lieutenant Colonel and current U.S. Senate candidate Chuck DeVore, who spent a lot of time with Charlie Wilson back in the 80s there in Afghanistan. And current U.S. Congressman Tom McClintock and Dana Rohrabacher, another person who spent time there in Afghanistan. Interesting article in, of all places, The Nation, recently talked about how Dana Rohrabacher and Tom McClintock said that the majority of the Republican caucus in Washington, D.C. would like to end our involvement in Afghanistan. As I mentioned before, the business of our military is to do one thing, and that's to protect our lives, protect our citizens. We are not in the business of nation building, and even if we were, we have to look at a place like Afghanistan and think, is this even possible? You know, the British and the Russians tried to do exactly that in the Great Game in the 19th century. They left a mess behind. I don't think it's possible when you have a country that has a 28% literacy rate to build a police force that's supposed to read and write reports. So I think the episode itself is going to end with reconciliation sooner rather than later.
Okay. I couldn't disagree more. I think Afghanistan is a very important ground right now that we have to maintain.
All congressional Republicans oppose the recently passed health care bill. What would you do to stop the implementation and funding for the Democrats' program?
Okay. Not surprisingly, I was also opposed to the health care bill. I think there are a couple of things that we have to take into consideration. Of course, I also the day that it was that it went into law, I put up on my website that I made my pledge to work to repeal it. I think from a practical point of view, it's going to be difficult to do because we will not have a veto proof. Even if the Republicans won the House and won every Senate seat between now and 2012, we wouldn't have a veto-proof Senate. So, so I think that the light at the end of the tunnel is, fortunately, is in the has to do with the states' rights and going through the legal system. The good news there is, of course, is that what they've done, what they pushed on us, is utterly and completely unconstitutional. There's no time in American history where we have been compelled to buy something. We are forced to buy something, not just under penalty of fine, but penalty of imprisonment. And what Nancy Pelosi has effectively done by jamming this thing down our throats is she has forced this country into chaos in a way. We had a real opportunity to address health care from a free market perspective. The real issue here is the third-party payer, because here's a fundamental economic rule. If somebody else is paying for it, you tend to consume more of it. And here's another one. If somebody else is paying for it, you tend not to look at the cost.
I would also bring up, though, I do think it would be good to go back to the beginning and do what Republicans plan to do, which was they proposed 37 bills, despite the fact that nobody ever heard that. And